Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Dishing Out. This week we look at that rich, creamy dish that you spoon bite by bite into your mouth. Its ingredients and flavor combinations are only limited by your imagination. That's right. You scream. I scream. We all scream. Risotto. Every day, more than 3.5 billion people on this planet eat rice. And for them, it represents more than 20% of their daily caloric intake, qualifying it as the #1 most consumed food in the world. Now that by itself makes it wholly worthy of an episode of Dishing Out. But so often, rice is relegated to sideshow status. Oftentimes, rice is steamed and then served up as a bed for something else, something more important, perhaps braised vegetables, meats, and a sauce. Often it's paired with beans to make a complete protein and a quick meal. But there is one dish in which rice plays the starring role, and that is risotto. Risotto dates back to the 14th century BCE. That makes it really old. It came about when Arabs brought rice to places like Spain and Italy. The growing conditions, particularly in northern Italy, were perfect for rice, and lots of different types of rice began to be cultivated. Today, we're going to be talking about short grain rice, because that is what you need for risotto. And in fact, it's really the only ingredient you can't substitute. The rice that we are most commonly used to consuming here in the US of A is a standard medium to long grain rice, such as jasmine or basmati. The issue with using such grains for risotto is that it doesn't have the amount of starch content needed to create that creamy sauce. Enter short grain arborio rice. Now, there's other types out there you can use, but this is by far the easiest to find at a grocery store. If you use this for risotto, you're going to have really mushy rice and a lot of water floating around your plate. Use this and you get what you want. There are only 3 necessary components to make a fine risotto. You need your arborio rice, you need a liquid, preferably some kind of stock with some flavor, and you need an allium-based base, maybe onions, shallots, garlic, or a combination thereof. If you've got those 3 things, you can make risotto. Now, for both of our recipes at the end, we'll be adding in a little bit of butter and cheese for added creaminess, but it's not entirely necessary if you don't have that or don't want to use it. And look, all you Italian grandmothers out there with your pitchforks, just sit down, alright? It's 2019. Love is love, and cooking is cooking, alright? Glad we got that settled. So the ingredients for our basic risotto are as follows. We have a tablespoon of butter. We'll be using a little bit of olive oil as well. 2 minced cloves of garlic, 1.5 cups of arborio rice, 4 cups of chicken stock, which I have over a low heat to keep warm, and finally 1 minced onion, about a medium-sized one. You could use half the large, which this distracts me and reminds me, I was at the grocery store earlier this week and I saw pre-minced onion in a little plastic tub. Now look, I am all for shortcuts when you've had a long day or you just don't have time to do something, but honestly, letting someone else mince your onions for you? That should be a crime. It's really easy, alright? All you gotta do is... The first step to dicing an onion is to identify the root and stem ends and bisect the onion between the 2 ends. Place the onion cut side down, take off the stem, and peel. Make sure you leave the root intact and slice. Depending on how thick or large you want your pieces of onion, I'm going to about 1/4 inch slices here. But I am not severing the root. At this point, we're going to go back through the opposite direction. Lastly, a brief note about pans. I'm using a straight-sided 10-inch skillet, but you could definitely use a medium-sized sauce pot for this. I like the skillet because I feel like it helps to promote evaporation of the liquid while the rice is cooking, but that's probably just something I made up in my own head. We're going to begin by adding our tablespoon of butter and probably an equal amount of olive oil over medium heat. And then we'll put our onion in. We want to sweat the onion, not caramelize, not brown, not saute. Just cook it lightly so that it gets translucent and starts to soften a bit. Once the onions are beginning to get soft and a little bit translucent, we're going to add in our 2 cloves of minced garlic and cook that out for about 1 to 2 minutes until the garlic is fragrant and softened. Once the garlic is softened, I'm going to go in with a few cracks of black pepper, good pinch of salt to season our onions, and it is now time to add the rice. We're going to toast this rice in the fats that are in the pan here. Now this is very similar to when we were making a roux in our macaroni and cheese episode. Just like the flour needing to be coated in all that fat so that it could expand but also not get lumpy. The same thing is happening here with the rice. It needs to toast slightly so that it can absorb some of those fats and oils so that each grain can expand in the liquid but not turn into a just big clump of rice. This will only take about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. The rice should just begin to smell a little bit nutty and it should start to turn a little bit opaque. So this is what you're looking for. Just a little toast on the rice, but nothing is burning or getting too brown. Alright, now that our rice is toasted off, I'm going to go ahead and season it as well with a little bit of salt. We can always add a little bit more at the end. You don't always know how much salt the stock or liquid you're adding has, so I try not to go too heavy with it. But it's time to start adding the liquids. We could definitely begin by just putting in ladles of our stock and stirring, but I like the extra flavor that you get by adding a nice dry white wine like a Chardonnay or Pinot Grigio. So I'm going to go in with a 1/2 cup of that. And just stir it around. It'll be absorbed or evaporate within about 1 minute, and then we'll start adding our stock. You don't have to use the wine if you don't have it or have any aversion to it, but alcohol brings out flavors and ingredients that water and stock just doesn't, and I think it adds something extra to the dish, so I definitely recommend it. Once that wine has been almost totally absorbed, which it has, we're going to start adding just a ladle of our warm chicken stock one at a time. And we're going to just slowly stir this around. And I hate to tell you, but you don't want to get too far away. You're going to need to keep stirring this and keeping an eye on it every minute or so. Otherwise the rice on the bottom can get stuck or brown. So once all of that liquid has been absorbed, or most of it, I'm just going to add some more stock. And I'm going to keep doing this in little increments every 3 to 4 minutes until all the liquid has been mostly absorbed. The rice is cooked through, and I will show you all how that looks and how you can tell when it's ready. So at this point, our risotto is pretty much cooked. I put all 4 cups of stock in, and actually the rice appeared to be getting a little dry, so I added about 1/2 cup of water. And that's going to happen to you too. You may not need all the stock, you may need a little extra. Just depends on the kind of pan you're using, the rice you're using, and all those kind of variables. So at this point, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and taste it. And you're looking for seasoning, of course, but you're also wanting to make sure that the rice has a nice bite to it. It shouldn't be hard, it shouldn't be crunchy at all, but it also shouldn't be like mush. It should be just kind of al dente, like pasta. So mine's perfect. To finish this up, I'm going to incorporate about a tablespoon or two of butter and some grated Parmigiano. But let's just say you didn't want to be so basic and you wanted to add a couple of other ingredients and flavors in here. Well, let's back this up. So let's talk about mushrooms briefly, shall we? Now, when you get your mushrooms, more than likely they'll be in some kind of packaging like this, and you're going to want to clean them off. A lot of times people freak out and say, don't wash your mushrooms. They'll, like a sponge, soak up all that water and be really rubbery. Well, mushrooms are 92% water. I don't think there's a lot more room in there for any more, so I wouldn't worry too much about rinsing them under some cool, clean water, but a nice damp paper towel or cloth will do the job just as well. Got about a tablespoon of olive oil over medium-high heat. I'm going to slide our sliced creminis right on in. Now I'm not adding any salt at this point. As we mentioned, mushrooms are like all water, and salt pulls water out. We want to let them brown as much as possible and release their liquids naturally without having the salt drawing it out too quickly. You'll notice how all the water is evaporating as soon as it leaches out of the mushrooms. That's allowing them to get brown without boiling away in their own juices. Alright, so to our basic risotto recipe, before we toss in our butter and Parmesan, we're going to go in with our mushrooms that we caramelized earlier. And 1 bag of baby spinach. Now that looks like a lot of spinach, but it's going to wilt down very quickly. That being said, you still may have to add it in batches. With the spinach wilted in and incorporated, we can go ahead and add in our final 2 ingredients. A couple more tablespoons of butter. And some Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. Freshly grated, please. Okay, look, I know I went all cheese nerd on you last week with the Gruyere and the DOP and all that kind of stuff, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. But I will say, Parmigiano Reggiano cheese is easy to find. If you get it on special, you can get it for $12 to $13 a pound, and even a quarter to a half a pound will last you for, several weeks in the fridge, I'm quite sure. All I will say is if the only Parmesan cheese you have is in that little green bottle, first of all, you don't have Parmesan cheese. Second of all, might want to get rid of it. If you ask me, this is a dish which can stand on its own. You could put a grilled chicken breast or some pork or steak on top and it'd be great, but that's everything you need right in one meal. It'd be great as an appetizer or even an entree. Now, that didn't take too long, right? Wasn't that bad, not that many steps. But I know that there's some of you out there saying, I'm not gonna stand over a stove for 30 minutes just to make one dish. I don't have time for that. I have video games to play. I have kids to tend to, and I get it. If you've ever watched an episode of Chopped, you've probably seen one foolish, brazen young chef who says, I'm gonna make risotto in 20 minutes. And invariably, it's undercooked and not very good. So it leads you to think that there's just no way to get a great quality risotto in 20 minutes. Well, actually, there is. All you need is an instant, excuse me. All you need is a pressure cooker. For our pressure cooker risotto, we'll be using more or less the exact same ingredients as we did for the stovetop version. We're going to start by taking the pressure cooker and putting it onto its saute function so that we get some heat in the bottom of that pot. And go ahead and put in a tablespoon of butter and another tablespoon of olive oil, and we're going to get our onion down in there, and we're just going to do the same thing. Let it sweat and soften up a little bit for about 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, so we are still on saute. I went ahead and added the garlic in and the rice and have it toasted just like we did in the pan. And with it still on high heat, I'm going to go ahead and add in our white wine. Cook that down just a little bit. Now I added 1.5 cups of arborio rice. For any kind of a pressure cooker recipe, you want to go about 2 to 1 liquid to rice. When you're doing it in a pot open on the stove, you're going to get a lot more evaporation, so you need to use more liquid. But in the pressure cooker, we're just going to go with 3 cups of chicken stock to our 1.5 cups of rice. So I'm going to go ahead and get that in. Season it up with a little salt, pepper, give everything a stir, make sure they all get to know each other. Now here's the magical part. We're going to put the lid on. We're going to cancel the saute, and we're going to set our vent to sealing or cooking, and we're going to put it on pressure cook, high heat, for only 6 minutes. Alright, that means it's heating, so we don't have long, but it's time to contemplate some flavor additions to our risotto. It may not be apparent based on how much greenery is left on these trees, but it is fall. And that means it's the perfect time of year to be cooking with gourds and squashes. My favorite of which is butternut squash. It gets sweet and very tender when you roast it, almost like a sweet potato, but less calories, so I guess that's a good thing. Although I can't see that I've really been caring about that too much lately. But that being said, it goes great with risotto. The texture is wonderful, and it really pairs nicely with sage. So we're going to do a little bit of sage and brown butter to complete the dish. For the butternut squash, I have taken the top half off of a medium-sized squash and peeled it. From there, I'm going to cut it down into planks and then dice it into about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch size dice. I'm going to get that onto a baking sheet, hit it with a little bit of olive oil and salt and pepper, and then I'm going to sprinkle on just a tiny pinch of clove. I like the flavor with butternut squash, but it can be overpowering if you use too much. I want people to say, is there clove in there? And not feel like, oh my god, there's clove in this. I'm going to take this and put it into a 425-degree oven after I toss everything together, and it's going to cook for about 30 to 40 minutes until the squash is soft and slightly caramelized. For our brown butter with sage, I've got about 3 tablespoons of butter just melting here over medium-high heat. Once it melts, the milk fats are going to start to separate from the milk solids, and it's going to start to turn a little bit of dark brown color. You don't want to let it go too far past that. Once it starts to brown, we're going to toss in a few sage leaves and fry them off. Once our 6 minutes are up, we just hit 6 minutes. We are going to do a quick vent. And we're almost ready. All right, we're gonna work in our roasted butternut squash. Some more Parmesan, and about 3 or 4 of those fried sage leaves. From here, we're just going to mix it all together. For final plating, we need to drizzle on just a little bit of that brown butter. Nobody ever said no to a little extra cheese. And garnish it with our fried sage. Well, if you've never made risotto before, I hope today's episode made you realize that it's nothing to be too afraid of. Whether you've got a pressure cooker or a pot, it can be done in about 30 to 35 minutes, or obviously less. You can add almost anything that you want to it, or you can have it on its own as an appetizer, a main dish, a side dish. It's just great food. I also want to add that both of the recipes I prepared today could be prepared with vegetable stock or water and be vegetarian, and are also gluten-free. Not that I really give a rip about that, but I'm sure some of you all do, so there's that to note as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear any comments that you have down below. Definitely subscribe and click the bell for future videos, and I'll see you on the next episode of Dishing Out. Until then, go make something delicious.